Hey guys, Corbin from Circa 2020 here. Now what we have is a CANIK TP9SFX and Galloway Precision supplied an awesome spring kit. Now, maybe I'm fortunate and maybe I'm unfortunate, but out of a dozen videos in my short YouTube adventure so far, I filmed an entire video and the camera has died. Bummer. The springs are in, but I'm still going to show you what you need to do to get them in. And I'm going to get into maybe a possible little conspiracy theory that I have about Galloway Precision's video that they did, because they may have had the same issue. So the first part that we're going to work on is the slide, because the first spring here that we're going to work on, there's only two springs. The first one is this little detent that works with the ejector, that works with the trigger mechanism. I don't know exactly what this part's called, but there's a little blue spring under it. Now, my firearm already had the blue spring installed, but the actual trigger spring was still factory, so possibly it's a CANIK thing. Possibly, maybe somebody put that spring in already. I don't know. Either way, we're gonna move on. I put the new spring in. First thing you're gonna do, guide rod's gotta come out. Barrel's gotta come out. Flip her upside down. I'm using an AR-15 vice block. If you have a pistol hockey puck block, that's great too. First thing you wanna do is grab a real small punch. This is a 3/32 punch. Now I have a set of transfer punches, and I also have a set of regular punches, but in my regular punches, a lot of them are bigger. My transfer punches go a lot smaller, and I'll show you why I like to use transfer punches for roll pins and for gun stuff anyways. So the first thing, you have your ejector pin here. So you want to push that pin down, and with your index finger, here's your ejector, you can get a hold of a very small piece of it right here. So you want to push I'm actually going to use my middle finger, because I'm going to use my index finger to make sure this piece doesn't fly out because it's spring loaded. So I'm going to push that pin down. That's going to automatically, as I'm pushing down, I'm going to put a little pressure on my middle finger, which is going to pop the ejector out just a hair, just a hair. You don't want to push it out too far, because if it goes past that pin and the pin can come up, there's a lot of pressure on that spring. So this pulls out. Remember the orientation. This notch here, this large notch, faces the ejector. Now there's a little spring inside there. All you have to do is turn it over, dump the spring out, grab your new spring, stick it in here or stick it down in there. Put this right here, I'll show you the spring. The spring is literally just right there, but because it's such a pain, because it doesn't stay in this piece, it's lined up, I'm just gonna put it right back in. Now all you need to do here is push that down in, push the ejector in, gotta make sure it's lined up. Boom, you'll hear that click, you'll feel it, you'll hear it. You might feel it more than you hear it. And the slide is done. You just want to make sure you can push down on this and everything works. It's nice and fluid. You don't really need to drop a little bit of oil down there if you don't want to. That can work being pretty dry. So that works, everything's good. Slide's done. Next, you replace this spring. So you can see this spring here, how nice and linear that spring looks. Two hooks on it. It is a symmetrical spring. It's the same on both sides. Here is the cattywampus mess that CANIK put in it. And I'm not afraid to say that. Here's the conspiracy with Galloway Precision's video on the TP9SF. He said that they never got these springs back from the company that they sent them to build the new springs. They said the company never sent the original sample springs back. I'm not calling Galloway liars, but what I'm saying is if they decided not to show how to get this spring out, I don't blame them because it was quite difficult. So the first thing you got to do, grab that same size punch. I like using the transfer punches only because the sharp coned end fits perfectly down inside a roll pin, and then you can tap them straight out. Now, everybody in my house is sleeping and I already did this, so I'm not going to beat on my gun more than I have to. But what you're going to do is, that roll pin's got to come clean out, okay? Once that's out, you either want to grab a punch. I have this little hook. You're going to grab on the bottom of the fire control group and just pull that up. It doesn't have to come up, 1/4 of an inch is fine. Just to expose this arm right here. You just want that arm to come up because the trigger control group ends right here. The polymer starts right here. You want it to come up right over the polymer so you can slide the spring off. Here was why I say there's a conspiracy. So the front of this, and not really a conspiracy, I don't care if Galloway did that or not. Listen, it's a pain in the ass getting this spring off. I wanted to do it the right way because people like to save their factory parts, and I didn't want to half-ass it and cut the spring. This spring is 3 parts. You have your center part, your actual coils, and then you have a crimped hook on the front and a crimped hook on the rear. The front just slides over just like the new one does, slides into this groove. Hopefully you can see. Actually, let me turn this light on so you can see a little better. Sorry about that. There's this little hump on each side. The new spring and the old spring just ride right inside that groove. On the rear, all it is a little indent on this arm. So that arm just has a little indent and the spring rides in there. The new spring has just a symmetrical hook like this on both sides. It's very easy to install. The old spring has this curly Q that they've crimped it and completely stuck it fast to this arm, and it is very difficult to get off. How I ended up getting off is I took this spring puller, this curled pick, and I curled it even more and actually sharpened it up so I could get in on the back side of this curly Q and kind of separate. It's a lot more rigid. It might not be able to work so well in my hands here, but I was able to separate these two and pull hard until it opened up this coil enough that I could slide it off the arm. So again, real quick, without the babbling, you knock this pin out here, this pin comes out, you pull up the fire group. Easiest way is just to grab right underneath this front bracket and just give it a quick little tug. You'll pull it up just so that this rear arm that you can see move, so that rear arm comes up above this polymer piece, and then you need to get in there and work the spring around for a little while to get it off that hook because it's tightly on there. The reason why they did that is because when this spring is in there under its resting trigger, when the trigger is just resting, sitting in its natural state, there isn't a ton of tension on this spring. So they made it and they basically crimped it around that arm so it can't come off. With Galloway's trigger, there is always tension. You can see that there is a gap, a symmetrical gap, identical gap in every one of these coils. There is always tension on these coils, even though it's not crimped on that arm and there's nothing technically holding it on besides that little indent and that little hook. It's never coming off. You can do this as fast as you want. You can even try to push the trigger forward. Obviously it doesn't move. That spring's not coming off. So now, the other way, part 2 to taking this spring off, would be to just get a set of side snips in there snip this right here, right behind the curly Q, snip it, grab a hold of it, and pull it off. It would be so much easier, but in the interest of doing things correctly and trying to do them correctly for the first video, I struggled for maybe even 5 minutes to get that little curly Q off that arm. It is a serious pain in the butt. Now, as soon as you're done with your slide, you can probably go ahead, slide your barrel in, slide your guide rod in, and just be done. Not a big deal. You don't have to wait. But I just wanted to move on here. And then sliding this back in. Obviously here we got CANIK and their beautiful infinite wisdom. Sometimes you gotta play with it a little bit to get it to slide all the way on. Now, this trigger, guys, you still have that kind of, let me come down here, sorry. You still have that kind of, I wouldn't call it sloppy. I'll tell you this now, on the factory CANIK trigger, that first 1/4 of an inch of movement was almost, there was nothing, it was very little. Now, that first pull obviously on CANIK is long and there's a lot of take up. That's the only complaint that anybody ever has about the trigger, and some of the aftermarket triggers, which we'll be doing soon to this, help that. But I will say that that initial take up is much more consistent. There's not like a nothing there and then a little bit of spring pressure. It's very, it has some tension on it from the start. The actual pull, the detonation of the trigger, has dropped from between 5.1 and 6 pounds to 3.2 and 4 pounds. The reset remains unaffected. The CANIK TP9SFX and really all the TP pistols have one of the best resets in the game, especially for their price point and not having a custom or performance center trigger, and especially being a regular semi-automatic pistol like this and not like a 1911 or something that's known to have a very good trigger system. Would recommend getting yourself a set of jewelry pliers. They're non-marring. It's for precious metals and diamonds and stuff like that, so it won't mar things. The nice part about jewelry pliers is if you're ever working around them, you slip, you're not going to hurt your firearm with those. Always keep your stock parts. And getting a good set of punches, I like the transfer punches only because the coned sharp end. Now, what I usually do with these, and what I will do, I just bought a new set of them because I wanted the smaller ones. I'm gonna go out and just knock the sharp edge, just a little bit of the sharp edge off. It's nice to have them coned though, because they sit, no, this is obviously too big, but they sit inside the roll pin. If you get one that's the same size as the roll pin here, that's probably gonna be the smallest one. It might even be able to go a hair bigger. It's the same size as the roll pin. It's not going to hurt the roll pin, but because it goes inside of the roll pin, it's not going to slip off or drive it sideways. It's going to come straight down through. Really nice. Transfer punches, the ones used on your firearms, I'd suggest just knocking the sharp end off of them with a grinder, or, even on a piece of stone, just rubbing it off so it's not so sharp. But other than that, I love those. I have another set of standard punches here, but they don't go very small, so I went out and got those. And then getting yourself a good hammer and a good block to work on. Now, this is obviously an AR-15 vice block and a magazine block, but I don't have the little pistol puck. I'd like to get one here soon. But really, when it comes down to it, I haven't had a whole lot of things that between this and this I couldn't accomplish. It's just something that's rigid, that's firm, that's a right angle, that's flat, that you can work on, that won't mar up your pistol like a polymer like that. So again, Corbin from Circa 2020, CANIK TP9SFX Galloway. Reduced power spring kit is less than $20. I think it was $18.99. You're supporting a small company, Galloway Precision. They do make a great product, and I think it's a heck of an upgrade and an easy upgrade to do, to drop a couple pounds on the trigger pull reliably without changing anything in the mechanism besides basically one spring. So again, Corbin from Circa 2020, we'll see you around.